here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make ethereal beats like Clams Casino. So as usual, you get the project file and samples and MIDI and presets for this video in the description, and if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because it'll be available shortly. And yeah, let's get started. So we're at 80 BPM, this is a little bit heard in the intro. First sound we have here is this pad, which sounds like this. So this pad, I'll show you the notes. It's just playing the chord progression. We've got A sharp, F, D minor, and then this weird like G minor here where I've just taken the third. I moved it down one semitone because it just kind of fit a little bit better with the vocal chops, and it makes it sound a little bit more interesting. But yeah, so this is the first thing here is like the kind of chord progressions you want for this kind of music. A lot of times, well, with like the older stuff, Clams Casino was using like samples, like he would just chop up a sample and get the chord progression from that, or like maybe have a bass line and have that be kind of doing it. But I definitely recommend sort of like writing out your chord progressions. As you can see, it's not that difficult, but this definitely adds like a lot to this track. If you listen to the overall track without it, it still mostly says the same thing, but when you add this, it adds a nice element to it. So it's definitely good to know how to do these. So like I said, I mean, pretty straightforward with the chord progressions. Just kind of like a sort of moody vibe, I guess. So then for the sound on this one, I made it using analog. What we've got is we've got two saw waves, and then those are actually going into a formant filter. So what a formant filter is it's meant to sort of like sound kind of similar to the way a human voice does. Like we have what's called formants, which are like different tones, like ah, ooh, ee, I. Like basically all the vowels are different formants. And yeah, this just allows you to kind of shape your sounds into something more similar to that. So here's without it. You can hear it's just a straightforward kind of saw wave pad. When we add it, it gives like this really nice kind of like smoother texture to these. So this is a really good way to create cool pads. I recommend playing around with this formant filter inside of analog, because you can hear we can move the frequency and get like completely different sounds. I've also got a little bit of resonance on that. That's a little pretty important for this sound. You can hear that's what kind of like opens it up. Then after that, I have the amp envelope set like this, and then the last thing we have inside of analog here is just a bit of vibrato. You can see I've got it going pretty fast, and the rate is pretty high at 58%. That's just hoping to give it more of like a cool kind of analog sounding texture. And then we just have a bit of unison, and so this is just giving it like a bigger sound. Without this, this is what it sounds like. It just felt a little bit more flat. I feel like this fills it out a bit more. So after that, we've got a bit of chorus. You can see I've got the amount there, right there, dry wet there. And so it's just adding a little bit more of like that kind of chorusy feel to it that we're getting from the vibrato and the unison. It's better to kind of do this with more nuance and more like detail work by doing like the unison and the vibrato and the chorus and have them all be kind of subtle, as opposed to having one that's just like really, really in your face. So yeah, then after that, I've got a bit of reverb. You can see we've got the decay time up, got the dry wet pretty high. It's just a big ethereal pad, so it has room for that. And then after that, we have a bit of saturation. You can see I've got this after the reverb, so this is pretty important for these sounds. If I put this before the reverb, you will hear we don't get that nice crunchy kind of reverb, but when I put it afterwards, we get that cool kind of like distorted reverb. It's a very subtle difference, but it's definitely a nice one. And the reason that this happens is because the reverb is basically like coming out at different volumes, or coming out of the reverb at a bunch of different volumes. And the way saturation / distortion works, if you don't know, is basically like the amount of input you put into it is how much distortion you get. So when you have this reverb coming into it with like varying different volumes, you get this kind of very nuanced and like organic sounding reverb. Like you can hear there'll just be a part there that comes through and gets all distorted. And yeah, I just think it sounds really good. Then after that, I have a compressor, side chaining into the kick, and the EQ8 cutting out the low end, and that is it for the pad. The next thing we have here is this vocal chop, which sounds like this. So the way that I made this was using my own voice, actually. What I did was I recorded myself singing into some auto-tune. I know, beautiful, but you can hear the auto-tune on there. I was really just trying to come up with like some random stuff. What I was doing here was I was trying to kind of just make myself a sample, and then the challenge was to take that sample and chop it into something interesting. So I was more aiming for like happy accidents. So that was what I did. Like I said, I just kind of sang a bunch of random stuff into some auto-tune. Then I froze that and I put it through some reverb. Because a lot of times the type of samples that Clams Casino chops up aren't just like, clean vocals like the ones that I had there a second ago. They're like, bigger kind of things like Imogen Heap and more like ambient style music, like stuff like that he's sampled where it has like a lot of atmosphere to it and it has a lot of like reverb and stuff like that. And this gives you a lot of cool background sound. Like if you listen to the chops here, it's not ever just that one note playing at once that it would be if you were just taking the vocal sample. But you can hear it's got, like I said, like that background atmosphere. And that really helps to kind of make it feel more sampled. So yeah, then from there, I just took it and I pitched it down, I believe. But then, yeah, once I pitched that down, I took it and I just chopped it up into these little quarter note parts. And so I was trying to get that Clams Casino style vocal chopping where it's like, burr, 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 something like that. And then the goal here is just to make these chops work really well with the chords. So yeah, and then you can see what I've done is I've just got it like this pattern where it'll play the same vocal chop 2 times and then go to the next one. Like this. And then the only other real detail there that I can show you is you can see also I've done fades on all of these, so I've just got the fades there. And the reason for this is because when you grab like parts of a vocal sample that you recorded, a lot of times it can be kind of like clicky and choppy. Like if you listen, you can hear that click there. So the fades just kind of get rid of that. But yeah, other than that, it's not really a whole lot to it. Like I said, the main thing here is to just sort of come up with a sample and then just sort of chop it and see what you can get. So I recommend doing the same technique. Just record yourself going like, or whatever, into some auto-tune, put it through some reverb, maybe some other effects, and then try chopping it up. It's a really cool way to make your own vocal samples. So, yeah, then for the effects on here, I have a few. So, here's what it sounds like completely dry. So you can hear it doesn't quite fit as well into the track completely dry. So the first effect I have here is this overdrive, which sounds like this. So you can hear this is hoping to give everything just a little bit more crunch, a bit more texture. I like using overdrive on these kind of vocal chops because, again, it's just a good way to kind of bring out that texture some more. After that, I've got a bit of OTT. You can hear it sounds like this. This is what's really taking it and just blowing it out like this. Not even so much blowing it out, but you can hear it's just really grabbing all those, every frequency and just pulling it way up and like flattening it out. So OTT is really good for these vocal chops. It's another thing that's like good for kind of taking something you recorded and giving it more of an interesting texture. Like you can see as soon as I turn that on, it sounds a lot more sampled. Then after that, I've got a bit of reverb. Pretty simple, just give it some space. And then we have a compressor, side chaining into the kick. And then the final thing that we have on here is much needed. It's this EQ8 cutting out the low end. You can hear there's a lot of low end in here. So I'm just cutting that out with the EQ8. And yeah, that's really it for the vocal chop. Like I said, it's not too difficult if you just do it the way that I did it. The next thing that we have here is this bass, which sounds like this. So it's just following the root notes of the chord progression. Pretty simple stuff there. But for the sound on this one, I made it using operator. And what we have here is this kind of like almost bass guitar style sound. So I've noticed with a lot of Clams Casino's music, he uses, it's very bassy and like sub heavy, and he uses a lot of these basses where they're like very deep subs, but they have a little bit more texture to them. They're not just like a sine wave or like a saw wave with a filter on it or something like that. So the way I made this one was using operator. Like so, we got some FM. I've got 3 sine waves here. You can see they're all at different octaves. And yeah, I'm just doing some pretty simple FM stuff with those. That's how it has that kind of like bass guitar style sound. After that, we just got a bit of chorus. It's not a whole lot. I'm just got the dry wet at 17%. Here's without it, and then with it. So you can hear, just helps to make the bass sound a little bit bigger, a little bit fatter. And yeah, then after that, I've got a bit of saturation. You can see I've got the drive there and the bass frequency up there. So this one's kind of driving home the sort of like more harmonically rich, warm sound. Here's without it, and then with it. So you can hear, it really helps to bring that out and just sort of bring it to the forefront. After that, we just have a compressor side chaining it to the kick, and that is it for the bass. So the next thing that we have here is this kick, which sounds like this. So this is pretty simple. Basically what I have here is I have this kick and then I have all my drums. And the reason why I have this outside of the drum group is because I've got a bit of processing on the actual drum group. And if we put it in there, you'll hear it gets distorted really easily. So I've just taken it and it's on its own. And yeah, so basically what I've got going on here is it's just this kind of like punchy, sort of like more old school style hip hop kick. And then I've got it going through a drum bus. So with the drum bus, I've just got a bit of drive, a bit of crunch. And yeah, just kind of beefing it up. I like putting drum bus on kicks like this. It's a really good way to kind of bring them into your track. Like this on its own is a little bit too just kind of dry sounding. It just kind of sounds like an audio file. When we add this drum bus, it's like that extra little piece of texture on top of it that really like brings it into the project file that we're working on and brings it forward. So yeah, so the next thing that we have here is this drum group, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you all the individual sounds and then just show you what's on the group. So the first thing we have here is the hi-hats, which sounds like this. So what these are, these 2 different hi-hats. We've got like an open hi-hat, which is playing quarter notes, and then we got this closed one, which is playing 16th notes. And I've got reverbs on both of these just to give them even more like atmosphere and kind of space in the way that Clams Casino usually will do. Like I've heard in his tracks, especially like I'm God, for example, like these type of beats, he usually will have like an open hi-hat like this playing quarter notes, and then that big reverb on it just kind of like moves over the whole beat. If I turn off the reverb, kind of similar to what I was saying with the drum bus on the kick, it's like the thing that takes this from just being like a sample and makes it like in the track. And then same thing with this closed hi-hat. I've got a little bit of reverb on this one, it's just a bit shorter. You can hear that same thing. The reverb just gives it a bit more atmosphere and kind of fits it in with the overall vibe of the track. After that, we've got the snare clap thing, which sounds like this. So what this is the snare layered with a clap. And the clap's got a bit of reverb on it. So I'll talk about the snare first. It's just kind of like this punchy, sort of like hip-hop style snare. Pretty simple stuff there. Just kind of like a really punchy snare that punches through. And then we have this clap, which is more like in the high end, and then that's adding a bit of reverb. So that's what gives it some space, because if you add like a lot of reverb to a big snare like this, you can hear it gets kind of messy. Like I just feel like you want this snare to just be the punch, and then this clap is what has the reverb. So it's just kind of like a bit of a cleaner way to do that. And I also think that the clap adds a bit of kind of punch to the snare. And then after that, on the drum group, I've got a few effects. So here's with nothing. And then with everything. So you can hear this processing here really helps to kind of bring it all out. So the first thing I have is some saturation, which you can see is just set like this. We got a bit of drive, a bit of bass frequency. Here's without it. and then with it. So it's just giving everything the same kind of like crunchy, sort of like almost lo-fi texture. And it's really bringing out the punch on the snare as well. After that, we've got a drum bus, which sounds like this. So you know, this is doing like that last little bit of like bringing everything out. Like it's adding even more crunch and punch to the snare. It's bringing the hi-hats out even more. And it really helps to give all the drums like a similar texture as well. Like if I turn these off, you can hear they sound a lot less together when we add these. By putting the same effects on each of these individual sounds at once, by putting them all in a group with these effects on them, you kind of get like a more similar and more together sound with all the different individual sounds than you would just having them playing on their own by themselves. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this one, guys. Just trying to show you some techniques. I've been getting a bunch of requests for this one lately, so figured it was time. And I hope you guys enjoyed. So that's me for today, guys. As usual, make sure to let me know what you think of this video in the comments. Make sure to like this video as well as subscribe. And hit that notification bell so you get a notification every time I drop some new, fresh content. You can also get the project file and samples from this video in the description, like I said. And if you're a patron on my Patreon, check there because they'll be available shortly without a download gate. Or, yeah, on my Patreon. Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. And I will see you tomorrow with another video.